From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support for LPM podcasts comes from the Eye Care Institute and Butchertown Clinical Trials, where they strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff, patients, and clinical trial participants. To learn more, visit butchertown.clinic.
I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson. Welcome to Race Unwrapped, a podcast unwrapping all the ways race affects our world, whether we're thinking about it or not. Today's guest is State Representative Attica Scott, who in 2020 has been on the front lines of racial justice protests. She proposed Breonna's Law, statewide legislation that would ban no-knock warrants. She was even arrested during Louisville protests. We talk about her work, her personal experience with COVID-19, and how truth has been stranger than science fiction. Welcome to Race Unwrapped. I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson. My guest this episode is Kentucky State Representative and Louisville native Attica Scott. First of all, I just wanted to say, Representative Attica Scott, thank you for being on the first season of my new podcast, Race Unwrapped. This season, I'm focusing on talking to women of color, Black women and other women of color, because when people talk about race, they typically are centering the men in the race. And when people talk about gender, as we both know, they're usually talking about white women. So I want to have conversations with women where we talk about that intersection, that space, that place that is so unique for us. And especially in times like right now where everything is coming at us from every direction. And you particularly have had all the things come at you. I mean, you know, we're in the middle of a COVID crisis, coronavirus crisis. You've had COVID, okay? Thank God you're better. Thank God you seem to be on the other side of that. We've had racial protests here in Louisville, Kentucky, with the death of Breonna Taylor, and you've been straight up on the front line of that. So, but then the third thing is this election. And even though, yes, we've had the election, my God, every day there's something new. So, I mean, let's just jump into that and start talking about that. As a Black woman, what are you most concerned about when you see President Donald J. Trump still trying to act like he gonna hold on to his seat in the White House like it's a throne?
Well, I think it's generous that you even refer to him as president, because there's nothing about his 4 years of occupying the White House that has been at all presidential. And I have been offended time and time again by the people who say that his ability to string together a full and complete sentence on occasion is presidential. In fact, what he has instead been doing is trying his best to destroy this country. And so we're seeing that right now as he every single day vacillates between Biden won to the elections were stolen. That is not healthy for a nation that's already experiencing a global pandemic, that's experiencing institutional and systemic racism and police violence. A leader moves on when a leader needs to move on. I have lost 2 elections and won 4 elections. And when I lost those 2 elections, I knew it was time to move on because the person who won needed to step in and lead in whatever way they felt that they were called to lead. Unfortunately, we don't have someone currently occupying the White House who is mature enough to understand that.
I mean, and as a Black woman, what particularly, you're a Black woman, you're a Black mother, you are a relative to other Black people, you're a neighbor, you're a friend, you're a politician, you have constituencies. What most concerns you about that as a Black woman?
Well, his entire 4 years in office have concerned me as a Black woman, as a Black mama, as someone who is deeply rooted in community and concerned about my Latinx siblings, my folks in tribal communities. It has concerned me and continues to concern me that we have someone who is determined to try to destroy this country, who is determined to try to hurt those of us who are Black, who during the midst of a global pandemic where we as Black folks were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, tribal communities, we saw in particular the Navajo Nation and how it was hurt by COVID-19. And just, this week, a dear friend of mine with the La Casita Center here in Louisville wrote an op-ed about the impact of COVID-19 on Latinx communities. Like, we've seen all of that, and yet we still have someone in the White House who refuses to take COVID-19 seriously, who is complicit with the Senate Majority Leader McConnell in making sure that we're not able to take care of our neighbors across the country who are, small businesses who are hurting, who are, schools that need PPE, et cetera. And so, as a Black mama thinking about my kids and other kids, and as a Black woman and the only Black woman in our state legislature, I feel like he is making it, to the best of his ability, almost impossible for us to effectively do our jobs of taking care of our neighbors across the Commonwealth who are in dire need of both economic and social support as we battle this novel coronavirus.
And as a Black woman, I mean, I'm not a mother, but I'm a daughter, and I've been, in fact, I hit the 56 mark next week, and I've just seen how my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother have held things down in their own different ways, in their own different spaces. But I look at what's going on now, and this is like nothing like any of them, even at their worst, even at society's worst. It wasn't as bad as this sort of nonstop, constant onslaught of stress. What do you think it is about Black women that helps us to pull through the worst of what's going on?
Well, I'll start by saying that the worst is in the White House, and that's part of why we find ourselves here right now. And white people have to own responsibility for that, particularly white women who refused to stand with us in 2016, but also we saw that in 2018 and really in 2020. In fact, they doubled down and increased the number of white women who chose not to stand with us as Black women against this tyranny that we're experiencing in our country. And so, as Black women, when I think about the movement for justice for Breonna Taylor, it's been Black women holding down the space, holding down Injustice Square, leading marches and protests and rallies, and leading the legislative response at both the local and state level, with Breonna's law at the local level and Breonna's law at the state level. It's been Black women making sure that people were fed hot meals at Injustice Square Park. It's been Black women making sure that people who are houseless have tents to sleep in, or have coats and jackets and hats and sweaters as the cold weather begins to creep in. It's been Black women who have made sure that we look at community safety in a different way, and that we protect and respect and take care of one another. That all throughout this sustained movement of over 175 days of justice for Breonna Taylor, I've seen nothing but Black women step up. But that's also, it's a microcosm of what we've seen across this country in these past 4 years. That it's been Black women who, as Coretta Scott King once said, if the soul of this nation is to be saved, then women, you must become its soul. Black women have been and continue to be the soul of this nation, moving us in a direction together where we can build a better country for all of us. And if people would just listen to Black women, if you would just listen to Black women,
right.
Then we can get somewhere together.
Oh my God, I say that. My friends, my friends who aren't Black women, particularly my white friends, have heard me say that for years. They heard me say that for years before the 2016 election. And so many of them try to go, Michelle, you're exaggerating. Things are better than they used to be. We're this, we're that. And I'm like, and then 2016 happened, and we saw how the country sort of just, swallowed some of us whole in some respects, right? And then 2020, it's funny you used the phrase double down when you were talking about the white woman vote. That was the exact phrase in my head. I mean, as much as people, had their comments about how could 53% of white women vote for Donald J. Trump, considering everything he said. Oh, I'll show you how. Let's have another election. 55%, So, but you bring up something that I've heard so many people talk about lately, as we've had the focus on how Black women have stepped up in our unique and fierce ways. There's Black men who were hearing that as a negative, like we're like in standing into the light and in our strength, that somehow is dissing the brothers. What do you think of that? Have you heard that argument? Have you heard that complaint, that concern?
I've heard it, but not from directly from Black men, and maybe that's because I'm intentional about surrounding myself with Black men who know how to love on Black women, who know how to follow Black women's leadership. My father, my brother, have both spent time in prison, and they grew up in the projects of Beach Terrace right here in Louisville, as I did, and I don't know any Black men any stronger than them or my son. And they are very clear that they affirm, they lift up, they support, they elevate Black women in our leadership, that they don't see it as competition or a threat to follow our leadership. Instead, they see it as us being in partnership, that we all lead in different ways. And in this movement for justice, both locally and across the country, Black women, we own our power, we own our voice, and we know how to mobilize folks for action. We know how to organize for institutional and systemic ways in ways that maybe other folks are not as well versed in or as capable as doing, but that doesn't mean your leadership doesn't show up in a different way because you're a Black man. Your leadership shows up in the way that best suits you and best suits the needs of other Black men. Work on that. Focus on that. Focus on Black men's mental health, Black men's economic and social needs, and support the work that we're trying to do because, as my friend Shamika Parrish-Wright always says, we get there together. Black women, we want our Black men to get there together with us.
Yeah, and see, I see that too, of course. I just have heard folks say things like it's a divisiveness that allows, um, white people and people in majority positions to divide us. I don't see it that way, but, you kind of addressed the topic very well. I mean, the men who are working in tandem with us probably don't see it that way.
Well, I think it's important for us to we got to do our own internal work around internalized racial oppression because we got to stop censoring whiteness. We have to stop acting as if whiteness is the default. We got to stop acting as if we are here to serve deference to or to please or to make comfortable white people. And for me, when anyone tries to create that kind of division, it's because you want to maintain the system of whiteness. It's not because you want to see Black people elevated. It's not because you believe that Black lives matter. It's because you believe the exact opposite.
Ooh, oh. See, this is what I'm talking about. In a podcast, we get to unpack and get real and take a minute with these topics because, these right now things are moving fast and furious and at the same time moving very, very slowly, right? Because I mean, you're in the midst of dealing with post-election issues in Kentucky. The country is in the midst of dealing with post-election issues with, President Trump in the office. And I call him President Trump because he's President Trump,
I know.
And I'm a journalist, and journalists have to call people by their proper names.
You do. And I believe in that, right? As a Black woman,
Yes.
I know what it's like to have people not want to acknowledge my position or title, but they will acknowledge the white person's position or title right next to me. So I feel you. I hear you. I understand that respective position.
Exactly. So, but on to another related topic. What do you think Kamala Harris being the VP, what do you think that symbolizes for Black women? And of course, Southern Asian women too. So I don't want to just make it about Black women. I know that Kamala represents a couple of different of backgrounds, ethnicities, heritages, cultural places. But Black woman to Black woman, what do you think this means for Black women?
Right. Well, and to your point about, people who are Southeast Asian, for example, I follow a lot of activists, organizers, leaders, thought leaders on social media who are Asian, who are Latinx, who are indigenous, etc.
Me too.
And what I've seen from her win and Vice President-elect is that it is actually bringing us closer together as people in movement, that we're being much more clear about how our issues and needs intersect and how we need to work together to build our collective power. And so that's vitally important for us as Black women, because we're not going to be able to do, and we've never been able to do anything alone.
No.
Although, if we got to go out there by ourselves, we certainly will do it. We're not going to back down from the fight. But we also are clear, I think, for the most part, that if we really want to build our political power, if we really want to be able to thrive across this country rather than to just survive, then we've got to build power together across our intersections, across ethnicity, across race. And so, I believe that with, Vice President-elect Harris's win, that we're beginning to see that other folks are seeing that they have that vision, that they have it as a value to build across our lines of difference and to really see where we're similar and grow and build from there.
I am seeing that too. I just know some fierce women that cross all the racial lines. So you're right. Strong women get stronger when there's space to do so. And that's and back to the other point you made. And strong women, when nobody's in our corner, hit the streets and do what we got to do. And we all do it from different perspectives. I'm a journalist and I'm an artist. I used to be an attorney a bajillion years ago. And ironically, of all the things I've done, I have found law to be the least effective way for me to get through to anybody. But that's a whole nother personal conversation. But
Right.
but yeah, I just think so. Then taking this to the local, what do you think that the city of Louisville has most learned from how strongly people have stood up for Breonna Taylor?
Yeah, there's been a lot that this city has learned, and really that the city has taught the entire Commonwealth. The city has learned what love looks like in public, right? We've heard that before, and I believe Dr. Cornel West was one of the first people to say that, right?
That's what the justice is what love looks like in person. I know that quote very well. Mm-hmm.
That's right, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now, at least from my perspective, that this movement is first and foremost about love for Breonna Taylor, who many of us didn't even know, but we love this sister, this Black woman who was taken from us at the beginning of her life. She had so many hopes and dreams. We have since learned since March 13th, this city has learned from us what it means to be in community with one another, and what it means to show up for solidarity. I believe that white folks who are paying attention have learned what it means to show up for racial justice, to not just talk about it, to not just say Black Lives Matter and have no action behind it, but to put some action behind those three words. Our movement has taught the city and the Commonwealth what it means to actually go out into the streets for someone other than yourself. From across Appalachia to rural Western Kentucky, we've seen marches and rallies and protests and solidarity with the movement for justice for Breonna Taylor and the movement for Black lives. We are teaching people that. We are teaching people how to be creative and how to document your movement. We've seen, the 502 live streamers grow from this movement. We've seen, cell phone camera photographers grow out of this movement, right?
Yes.
We've seen all of it grow from a movement that was seeking justice for a Black woman. And we have shown this city what it means to demand justice and to expect nothing less than justice.
It's so funny. I live, as I said, I've only lived here a few months, but I live right on Broadway. And to lean out my window with my cell phone, not too long, not too hard, because I'm not trying to lose my iPhone, but to take photos, take videos of the movement and send them back home to Kansas City, put them on my Facebook my page, where people from all over the country can see this is what this looks like in real time. Like this is what's happening when hometown protest over George Floyd had long since stopped. This is what this
Mhm.
looks like when people do it consistently, even when it is raining and it is cold and
Mm.
and I just see so many different kinds of people out there. So let me ask you this. I don't know if you get this question much, Representative Scott, but what do you do for self-care? Because you are on the front lines, like all the time.
Well, that's a very good and fair question, and self care looks differently for everyone. But I believe it's important for me to center my emotional and mental health. So when I need to tap out, I tap out.
Mm.
When I need to say no, I say no. And I told a group of young people just this week that no is a full and complete sentence with a period at the end. So if you
Yes.
need to say no to something, then say it. Ask for the help that you need. So if I'm in a situation where I'm like, you know what, I don't have the energy to, cook something tonight. I might, call my son or text him and say, what are you doing this evening? You want to order something to eat? Self-care for me is picking up a good sci-fi or fantasy book by a Black author and
Yes.
digging deep into that because that's who I am. It's binge watching Lovecraft Country.
Oh, I still got to
Um, you
see
know,
that. Ah.
Oh, it was so good. Self care for me is, being able to just go outside and sit on my back porch and just look at this tree that looks like, some of the elven trees from Lord of the Rings. And so, but self care is also getting on the phone with my father who has stage 4 prostate cancer
Mm,
and hearing his voice and
mm.
talking to him. And, he was someone who moved to Los Angeles to join the Black Panther Party. So I get to hear his analysis and his different perspective than mine. Self-care is spending time with my kids and watching who they are becoming and just supporting them in their leadership development. Like self-care looks like all the things for me. But, self-care is also how am I able to take care of my family members and friends? Because I feel good when I'm able to do something to support them. That
Mm.
brings me joy. Self-care is me owning that joy and being able to say in the midst of all of this trauma and violence from police, I will never lose my joy. I'm not going to allow them to lose my joy. And I'm going to support people in trying to find where their joy is so that whenever they need to come back to that center, to that core, to that joy, that they're able to do so.
It's funny. One of the things I love about Black people in general and Black women in particular is we don't let nobody stop our joy. In the most
Mm,
painful of situations, we show out. One of my favorite things in my head when I see certain things is you can't outdo Black people. Okay?
mm.
you know, and you see it all the time in in the most horrific of circumstances. You can just find that you can see some Black woman somewhere holding it down with a sense of beauty or spirituality or just a laugh, just a good laugh. You mentioned that Black science fiction writers, that means that of course you are a fan of one of my favorite authors, Octavia Butler.
Oh my goodness, without a doubt. What? I'm looking at my bookshelf now at a couple of her books that I own. Of course.
Oh yeah, I love Octavia Butler. In fact, I'm a playwright in addition to what I do for WFPL. Been a playwright for about 10 years, and I have a play called Echoes of Octavia that
Mm.
talks about the main character's love of Octavia Butler, and her mother, her dead mother's name was also Octavia. So anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But the
Yeah.
point is, I'm like, I love that you and I can bond over science fiction and Octavia Butler.
Yes, we can. Octavia Butler, but there are also, some new folks who are coming out and writing fantasy and sci-fi. So, we got to dig into them as well when we get a chance.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've always noticed about science fiction is that it seems to be the only place, and I've seen this my entire life going back to the original Star Trek, where it takes science fiction for us to see women of color in power, where we see people of color, regardless of gender, holding space equally with white people.
Mhm.
Where you got to go to not just fiction but science fiction for there to be that kind of equality. Do you see that changing anytime soon? Are we moved to the place where science fiction has become real, or are we still working on that?
No, I believe we're moving to the place where science fiction and reality are beginning to merge. I mean, we've got Star Trek Discovery, right? With a strong Black woman lead, and we see that merging with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who's one step away from being President Harris. So we're beginning to see the merger of science fiction and reality. Science fiction is our dream, right? It's our vision of what can be, and it's a vision of what we can work toward.
My guest today was Kentucky State Representative and Louisville native Attica Scott. That was the first season of Race Unwrapped, a podcast conceived and born in the love of talking about and unpacking race in America. I'll see you next season. In the meantime, you can email me with feedback or ideas at raceunwrapped@wfpl.org. This podcast is listener supported. To chip in, visit wfpl.org/raceunwrapped and click donate. You'll find the full first season there too. I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.
Race Unwrapped is produced by Michelle Tyreen Johnson for Louisville Public Media. Our senior producer is Laura Ellis. Allison Cross created our music. For more information, to contact us, or to support Race Unwrapped, visit wfpl.org/raceunwrapped.